And we should be live. I would say blink if you can hear me, but that's kind of weird. So type anything in the live chat if you can hear me. Excellent, thank you for confirming. Now, if I can only figure out how to. Okay, excellent. Now, you should see it full screen right now. So I welcome you guys, Ids and Carlos, to this live stream about where we will learn how to write songs using only our lovable keyboard. It was way easier than I imagined, but live and learn, I guess. It seems there are like 3 concurrent viewers at the moment. If you guys are okay, I'll wait like 2, 3 more minutes to see if anyone else joins, so as to not repeat myself. Also, thank you for the compliment, Ids. Much appreciated. Hey, Carlos. So, how's this? Is any one of you celebrating Easter today? Because if so, happy Easter. We're like 1 week off. So next Sunday is Easter for us. Okay, thank you guys. I'll just wait for a bit to see if anyone else joins, and if anyone else does join, feel free to leave a message, so as I know you're here. Uh, yeah, well, what can you do? Yeah, eating a lot is whatchamacallit, is like a tradition here too. I've heard of very weird ways in which people actually force themselves to eat more than they usually need to, but let's let's leave them for another day. Now, I think it's a good time to start. So once again, welcome to this wonderful stream where we will be learning how to write a song in Reaper. Now, before we get to the meaty part, I should think a brief review of the musical alphabet for anyone, and scientific pitch, of course, for anyone who doesn't exactly know it would be good. Then I'm going to review some music theory concepts, some basic ones, and then we will get to understanding what a DAW is, a digital audio workstation to be exact. We will then talk about MIDI for a bit, look at some VSTs, and then finally use the keyboard as a MIDI controller and actually write something in Reaper. Now, as some of you may know, the musical alphabet has a total of 7 different notes. They are the first 7 letters of the alphabet. The corresponding uh, Latin names, I think, are so basically the notes are C, D, E, F, G, A, and B, and their Latin names are like Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, and Si. As for scientific pitch, each and every sound we can hear has a frequency between 20 Hz and 20 kHz. The higher the frequency, the higher we hear the sound, or the higher its pitch. And as a result, we can form what is known as 10½ octaves between these two frequency values. An octave is basically the place where a frequency either doubles or halves its value. And one important thing to remember is that what is known as the middle octave is the fourth octave. Let me see if I can actually give you C4. No, not the explosible one, but the actual note. Let's see if I remember how to do this. So let me just do a little bit of configuring, and so as to know exactly what I'm referring to as the middle octave. On a guitar, it's basically the C note located on the B string first fret. It should be like this one. Right over there. So, moving on, some basic theory concepts which will prove very useful for this for writing music. If I can, okay, right. So, the time signature and note length are two things that are very closely related to one another. The time signature defines how many beats are in a bar or measure of a song. The most common one, especially in rock music, is 4/4. And as you can see, it has two numbers. The first one tells you how many beats are in a measure, the maximum number of beats or equivalent beats. And the second one gives you the main note length that is considered a beat. For a 4/4 time signature, that can be interpreted as each bar or measure having a total of 4 quarter notes worth of notes, because you don't have to have exactly 4 quarter notes per bar. Speaking of quarter notes, that is actually one of the note lengths, and a note length determines how many beats a note lasts in a measure. The most common note lengths are a whole note, which lasts 4 beats, 4 quarter notes in a 4/4 time signature, a double note which lasts 2 beats in a 4/4 time signature, a quarter note, eighth note, and so on. As you can see, a whole note is the equivalent of 2 double notes, 4 quarter notes, etc. Basically, it's the power of 2. God, did that sound as cringy as I thought it did? Moving on. The tempo of the song determines whether or not chairs get thrown at you, or otherwise the speed of the song, and it's usually measured in BPM, which is beats per minute. There's actually a neat little formula that can tell you exactly how fast you're supposed to play it. So for a 60 BPM rhythm, that basically means that for a 4/4 time signature, each quarter note will last approximately a second in time. Tones and semitones, which are also known as steps or half steps, are basically tonal distances between notes. Between each octave, you can have a total of 12 different notes. So between C4 and C5, for example, you can have a total of 12 different notes. I'm going to actually play them for you one by one, starting from C4. So it's like C, C sharp, now D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, that was the G, G sharp, A, A sharp, and B, and finally C5. Basically, we've moved from one semitone. The difference between each of those notes, each consecutive note, was one semitone, and a tone is basically comprised of two semitones. That's the whole gist of it. On the guitar, as you probably already know, A step is basically the distance between two frets, and a half step or semitone is the distance between, it's a one fret worth of distance. You may have also noticed that I've used sharps when naming the notes before. Those are part of what is known as accidentals, which are used to alter the pitch of a note, and the most common ones are the sharp, which raises the pitch of the note by one semitone or a half step, the flat, which lowers the pitch of a note by one semitone, and the natural, which basically tells you to play the note with no alteration. Sharps and flats and naturals are usually used either next to a note or in the key signature, but that's another discussion for another day. Now, moving on to DAWs. A DAW is something is a sound that you make when you see something cute, and in our case, the cute thing is called the Reaper. DAW stands for Digital Audio Workstation, and in short, it's basically the program that you use to create your songs. Aside from Reaper, you can also have Cubase, Ableton Live, Pro Tools, and Audacity, though I don't really recommend Audacity, though I've used it for quite some time. I don't know if they released a more professional version, but it was easy to use, but didn't really provide much functionality. Now, possibly the most important thing to understand here is MIDI. MIDI is an acronym for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. And while the technical definition for it is a bit abstract, uh, each in essence, a MIDI file or a MIDI note contains a bunch of information regarding a note. It's basically a set of instructions which are to be interpreted by a computer so it knows what it's supposed to be playing. Each MIDI note contains information regarding its pitch, its length, meaning how much it's supposed to last. Velocity refers to the volume, how hard you need to hit the note in order to basically how God damn it, my Romanian to English translation is annoying sometimes. Basically, how loud the note is supposed to be played. It can also contain information regarding vibrato and panning. By panning, it means if it's meant to be in the center or on your left or right headphone or speaker. And it also has a bunch of clock signals that determine how fast that determine the tempo. Basically, how fast everything needs to be played. Uh, it's a MIDI file is basically a bunch of musical data, which on its own doesn't really signify that much, but coupled with some virtual instruments, it can allow you to actually produce songs without actually having to play the actual instrument. VSTs. VST is an acronym for Virtual Studio Technology. If I remember correctly, it all started out when people wanted to have access to certain effects, which only musical producers had, but people sort of wanted to not have to buy 5 different pedals for 5 different effects. So VSTs came along. And aside from effects, you can also have virtual instruments. I've also left some downloadable VST links in the description, if I remember correctly. I wanted to have access to certain effects, which only musical producers had.
Yeah,
But
they're there.
people sort of wanted to. Everything should be fine. And yeah, that's really all there is to it. Now, let's get to the fun part. So, I've already done something in Reaper here, but I'm going to do it again. So let's remove this track. So what you want to do first in Reaper is you'll want to insert a track. You can either go here to insert new track, like so, or you can use the shortcut Ctrl plus T, like this. I don't need 2 tracks. Now what we want to do here is actually assign an instrument to this track at first. So I want to go to this little button here, the FX button, and this window will open up. Now we want to add, if it'll, oh yeah, for some reason it opened on the other display. We want to click add, and then we want to add an instrument. As you can see, when your VST is actually an instrument, there's a small I next to the T to signify that's actually an instrument. We're going to use a Keyzone Classic piano since it's easier to work with. Select it and click OK. I usually use the Yamaha Grand Piano because it sounds nicer to me. As someone who has played the piano, I think the Yamaha Grand Piano is the closest to a live piano that you can get. And as you can see, when you press these notes, I don't exactly know why, but the octaves are a bit shifted to the left. So what you see here as C3 is actually C4. I don't exactly know why Keyzone Classic does that, but whatever. That's less important. So now that we got that straightened out, we actually need to start doing what is called recording through MIDI. To do that, you need to arm your track for record, and that is done by pressing this button here. Now we need to select a different input. As you can see, I have this input, which is basically the one I use when I record my guitar, but we don't need to record the physical instrument. Now we need to record from MIDI. And to do that, you have to click here, go to Input MIDI, Virtual MIDI Keyboard, and select all channels. That is basically how you wire your Reaper to allow it to record from MIDI. And in order to actually play something, we need a keyboard, a virtual keyboard. And we need to use our very own keyboard for that. That can be done in two ways. Either you go here at View and select Virtual MIDI Keyboard here, and it should appear. I have two displays, so that's why I have to drag it. And yeah, as you can see, you have a bunch of, I don't know if you can see actually, let me see if I can make this bigger. Okay, as you can see, you have certain notes that you can use to play. You have certain keys on your keyboard which are associated to some notes. So I'm actually using my keyboard to play the notes right now. It's a bit weird. As someone who has played the piano, I can't actually play this keyboard as well as the piano. As you can see, the black keys, the keys, not the band, are the ones that actually produce the notes with accidental. So when you press S, you'll get a C sharp note. So if you want to actually record this, all you have to do is I don't actually know where the record button is. I usually use the shortcut, which is Control plus R. I'm blind. Here. So you can either use this and start playing, recording, sorry. And for some reason, this is why I use Control plus R, because after you press record, you have to reselect the virtual MIDI keyboard, otherwise nothing will happen. Hence why there was a bit of delay when I actually started playing. Yeah, that's how you record. And now, as I think I have mentioned in this slide, we can actually go and use the piano roll. I'm going to close the virtual MIDI keyboard since I don't really need it anymore. Now, in order to access piano roll, you need to select your MIDI track and double click anywhere. Let's click here. And this window will have opened up. You can actually use the mouse wheel to scroll, to zoom in or out. And as you can see, there are certain areas where notes are actually displayed. everything here is empty, but you can see that you actually have notes here. You can actually select the notes, and you can actually insert notes by hand here. So when let me zoom in for a bit. So when you click here, a note will actually be added. Now, when you're in piano roll, you can do a bunch of stuff. You can edit the length of a note. You can delete notes entirely by either right-clicking and selecting delete, or pressing the delete let me add here a note. By pressing the delete key on your keyboard. And you can also right-click a note and do a bunch of stuff with it. You can change its velocity. These numbers are basically, the higher the number, the higher the velocity, and there is really not much more to it. And you can also do a multiple selection for notes by holding the right mouse button and dragging. And as you can see, multiple notes have been selected, and you can change the velocity for multiple notes at once. Let's put it at 72. And another cool thing is that the lower the velocity, for lower velocities, you can actually have different colors for each note. So when I went to a 72 velocity, the color went from red to, I believe, green. I don't really see colors that well, so if I'm way off with my colors, know why. The velocity here, actually you can see the change also here in the lower part. Yeah, as you can see, the velocity is for these notes is lower than the one here. You can actually change the color based on several things. I usually leave it on velocity for simplicity's sake. And an important thing to note here is this grid option here. I actually have it set at 128th. What this does is basically determine the smallest duration of a note you can insert or otherwise edit in piano roll. If you install Reaper, by default it should be at 132. And let's see if I can exemplify this better. So, say you have, let me just, oh, by the way, another cool thing is that you can actually move notes so that they fit at the end of a bar. As you can see, each bar, since we have a 4/4 time signature, I'll show you where to edit that in Reaper in just a moment. But each bar basically has a maximum of 4 beats. So whenever you see a line like this one here, it's where a bar starts. And you can actually have the other beats of the bar here, the second, the third, and the fourth one, with the first one being, of course, where the bar starts. And you can use these lines here to determine to make sure that your notes don't cross to the next bar or measure, and you can actually make it so that they end at a certain time in the bar. The higher this, or the lower actually, the higher you go here, the higher. Let me see how to put this. So what you can do here is basically, when you have it at 132, you can add or subtract the length of a note by a 30-second note. If you actually go to 116 here, you can do it even less fine-grained. So you can add or edit a 16th note out of your note. If you go to 1/8, it's even lower, so you can actually only add or edit an eighth note. As you can see, since since a beat starts here at 3/3, if you were to actually edit, would want to lengthen or shorten the note, you can only do it in eighth notes. So as you can see, since we know that a quarter note is equal to 2 eighth notes, and the beat starts here, when I try to edit it, then actually I can only edit it up by an eighth note. Hence why it goes to the start of the fourth beat. I usually like to keep it at 128 because I can't really record acoustic guitars because lots of noise, and so I have to use the ample guitar VST to do that. And in order to produce that drum sound effect, like you're strumming a chord but very slowly, you are arpeggiating it, I have to have a really, really, really fine grain of doing it, because otherwise it's gonna sound like it's going to sound way too computerized. Is there anything left that I want to talk about in this piano roll? I don't really think so. I don't really think so, but so in order to exit, you just close here, and you can see that the modifications that we made are kept inside the track. And as I said, you can edit a bunch of stuff for the song in Reaper here. You can edit the BPM. I left it at 120, which is the default, and you can also edit the time signature here, which will impact your song, by the way. So be careful with that. And yeah, that's about it. So now is the time when you ask whatever questions you have, and hopefully I can provide the answers for them. Be aware that there's going to be a delay between when you enter the question and when I get to see it. So bear with me on this one. On a side note, up until you guys think of questions, I can honestly say that Ed's idea of keeping these streams a bit shorter is actually good. After last week's almost 2 hour stream, I was kind of starting to sound like Christian Bale's Batman afterwards, and for about and for the next day as well. So yeah. So no questions yet. So either I'm very good at explaining, or once again I've lost you somewhere down the road, or YouTube's delay is infinite. As long as we're in Reaper, let me show you something. These VSTs are they can be of two types, basically. They can be either entirely sample based, or they can produce sound synthetically based on some instrument samples. And Reaper knows how to load these because and Reaper can know how to load these only if you place them in certain folders. Now when you install it and you then go to options and preferences in Reaper, you can then go to plugins and VST on the left. Hello there. And as you can see, you are if you go on the left here on VST, you can have a VST plugin paths field here. Now, by default, it's going to add a bunch of folders. I think they are the installation folders. Um the process might be different. I mean, connecting using your keyboard as a virtual BD controller is might have to be done a bit differently than is done in Reaper. But the process of recording MIDI should be the same. It all depends on how different DAWs do this. I haven't really used any other DAWs since I started using Reaper, so I don't know an exact answer, but I definitely know that I've seen a video way before with someone using his keyboard in something called PreSonus, another DAW basically. It was basically the same. The idea behind it is the same. How you get there might be different based, of course, on each workstation. So going back to these VSTs, I actually created a separate folder so as to better handle them. And you can have as many folders as you like here. And whenever you add one, you can add or remove one. You can use this rescan option here, and it will automatically load up your VSTs. Now, how a VST looks, it's at least for Windows, the operating system I am on, it's basically a DLL file, which these VSTs basically come in various forms of archives, either a RAR archive or a zip archive, and all you have to do to make them work is extract the contents of all the contents from that archive in one of the locations defined here. So for keysome, basically, let me just show you. When you're here, so I created this plugins folder here, and as you can see, I have a bunch of them. But what I basically did is, like, as you can see, I have this keysome classic.instruments here, which contains some information. But the most important thing to add, aside from this one, is actually the keysome DLL file, which is here. This DLL file is basically your VST, and the folder here, the keys on classic.instrument, it's basically contains all the information required to produce the sound. As I've said, some of these are sample based, some of these actually have some code behind them that produces the sound synthetically. And yeah, as you can see, I've had a little bit of fun with some VSTs at first when I didn't really know how to use them. So I mean, I think out of all of these, I use like 5 or 6 in total. You don't really need them all. So yeah, that this was just like a fun fact. So yeah, this is all I have for you today. So if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them. I'm gonna wait for them to load if anyone has them. I hope you enjoyed it, by the way. Hope you found it informative. Okay then, Carlos, that's good to hear. Speaking of which, if you ever want to actually use MIDI but not actually write every note by itself, Reaper allows you to import MIDI as well. Basically, I created a new track, and you have this insert, and you can actually use the insert media file to insert your MIDI track here. So, yeah, let me just do that for a bit. Let's use one here. So when you open it here, Reaper is going to ask me, since I write it in Guitar Pro, each piano has like two separate tracks, one for the right hand and one for the left hand. Hence why it asks me if I want to expand two MIDI tracks to new Reaper tracks, which is yes. And yeah, the tempo of the song is a bit different, so I usually leave these checked. And it will also give me this. You want a multi-channel item on a single track. Always keep this like this for both of them. And as you can see, by the power of magic, it didn't insert it at the beginning, but that's less important. It actually inserted two MIDI tracks with something I've already written in Guitar Pro and exported as MIDI. So yeah. So since there seem to be no other questions, I would like to thank you for joining me tonight, and I wish you all a pleasant Sunday evening or early morning or wherever it is. And up until I can come up with a new idea for a stream for I Am Empty at the moment, I'll see you later.